Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming for this community information session on data centers. And I, like you, am interested in learning more. As technology continues to shape how we live, work, and connect, data centers are becoming an increasingly integral part of our infrastructure and our economy. Tonight's session is an opportunity to learn more about what data centers are, how they operate, the potential benefits and drawbacks that can bring to a community. Additionally, the questions and concerns residents have regarding development, energy use, water resources, traffic, and long-term impact will be addressed. Newberry County Council currently has conducted 2 readings and a public hearing for Ordinance 03-01-2026. This is not an approval to construct a data center, but rather necessary to allow the developer the opportunity to conduct due diligence specifically related to electric, water, and wastewater loads and requirements, and to develop a plan. The county received a significant number of questions through the online submission form from more than 50 individuals, the majority of whom are county residents. Many of the questions focused on the specific operations and implementation of a potential data center user. At this time, those details cannot be fully addressed because an end user has not yet been identified. However, the questions submitted have provided valuable insight into the issues that are most important to the community. And in response, the county staff has actively reviewed and revisited or revising data center related standards and policies to ensure community priorities and concerns are thoughtfully considered as discussions move forward. Again, there is no deal with a data center, so we're here tonight to discuss data centers in concept, not a specific user. And we're committed to maintaining a constructive, informative, and respectful environment. We expect everyone to conduct themselves professionally and respectfully as matters affecting the future of our community are presented. Audience questions and comments will not be taken during the event. All questions should have been submitted in advance for consideration. Having said that, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. Chris Lloyd leads the Infrastructure and Economic Development team at McGuire Woods Consulting, specializing in site selection and economic development incentives. Since 1998, he has advised corporate expansions and relocations nationwide and has helped develop public-private partnerships and economic development legislation adopted by states across the country. A frequent speaker on economic development policy and best practices, Chris previously served in Virginia's office of the Secretary of Commerce and Trade under Governors Allen and Wilder. He's a graduate of the College of William and Mary. Cole Price is Central's Executive Vice President of Member Services. He works directly with South Carolina's 19 distribution cooperatives and the South Carolina Power Team to support economic development in the areas of pricing, contracts, and renewable and sustainability goals. He is also responsible for wholesale billing, contract and rate development, and downstream program development. With more than 30 years experience, Price has held various roles at both public and private utilities in the Midwest and the Southeast. Price holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and an MBA. So I turn the program over to our 2 speakers.
Great. Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to go ahead and stand up because otherwise I'm going to be sitting here turning around the whole time with the presentation. So it's great to be with you all here in Newberry County tonight. When I came into Columbia, and the guy at the rental car counter said, "What are you doing in town?" I said, "I'm actually going to be in Newberry tonight." Because, well, he's a graduate. His name was CJ. He's a graduate from Newberry College. So it's great to be here. Yeah, give him a shout out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a presentation. We're going to probably take a little bit, around an hour. I'm going to speak for about 15, 20 minutes about some general issues, and then we're going to have a discussion of some of the power-related issues. That's when Cole is going to interject, and then I'll wrap it up with some issues after that. But I want to be clear. If you notice the title here, it is Data Centers Evaluating What is Right for Newberry County. Not why are data centers right for Newberry County, but what is right. And so my goal here is to be as objective as possible to talk about the good and the bad of data centers, the issues this community needs to confront and to decide whether they are right or whether they are wrong for this community. And that's the whole purpose, and that's where we will conclude. So I'll start very quickly with just walking through some statistics to just run through what's going on with the data center industry. McKinsey, which is a global consulting firm, came out with a study a couple months ago that talked about the amount of money that's being spent in data center development worldwide between now and 2030. And if you even look at their mid-range scenario, you see that the expectation is that nearly $5.2 trillion is going to be spent on data centers and the power to support them between now and 2030. This is an enormous industry. And to put it into perspective, this compared the investment by the main data center companies to other major infrastructure investments in our country over our history. And you look at the bottom, you look at the space race and the Apollo program, and think about what the Apollo program did for this country. I mean, heck, we got Velcro and Tang out of the Apollo program. Tang, the drink for astronauts. And you look at the Apollo program was 0.2% of our GDP. And the spending that we see now in data centers is now equivalent to 2% of our GDP. It is an enormous amount of investment that is occurring. So you can't ignore what is going on with data center investment because it is such a significant amount of money that's being spent with regards to data centers. And the reason money is being spent by data centers is because of you. Look in the mirror. And think about the use that you have of data centers each day. Each home in America, these are some industry statistics that I pulled off the internet, that each home in the US has an average of 16 connected devices. Think about your sound bar, your Ring camera, your microwave, your refrigerator, all the other devices around your house. Think about your car, which is essentially a mobile computer. Maybe your car is, mine is not. I drive a 2005 Honda Accord. We hit 408,000 miles on my Accord last week. The most sophisticated thing on it is the cruise control. But most people have a lot of data in their cars and their homes, and that is what's driving data center growth. Every day, Netflix users are streaming 203 million hours of content. That all is stored in a data center. You think about the number of people that have a smartphone in America. That all relies on data centers. You think about the amount of time that you use and spend on maps and Waze getting to places. We live 2 miles from Target. My wife uses Waze to get there. It's just a force of habit. You think about online banking, travel, all that we do is dependent upon data centers. So it is customer demand that is driving the development and the need for data centers. And we are just starting to scratch the surface. Think about what we will need, what the computing demands will be when we move to autonomous vehicles in this country. When computers are driving all the cars up and down the interstate. The computing power that's going to be necessary for that. So it is a customer-driven demand that is necessitating the development of data centers in this country. And this is the latest data on how many there are in the country. They are not just few and far between. There are data centers in this community and you don't even realize it. There are data centers all across this state. And this is the map of South Carolina, which is starting to see many more data centers. Now again, South Carolina doesn't have as many as my home state of Virginia, or Texas, or Ohio, or Georgia, but they're growing. And they're ubiquitous around the country. Again, South Carolina, you see where the clusters are there. So why do data centers get a bad rap? And it's because of this. This is my home state. I live in Richmond. This is Northern Virginia. This is near Dulles Airport, where Data Center Alley is born. And really, after Al Gore invented the internet, as y'all will recall, the data center industry really grew up around Washington, D.C. Because one of the major nodes for the internet, which is known as May East, is located in a parking lot in Northern Virginia. So the original companies, UUNet, Verizon, AOL, y'all remember the discs you would get in the mail from America Online. The data center industry grew up around it. In the middle of one of the largest urban centers in our country, Washington, D.C. So you had data centers going onto lots of 10 acres. That land now for data centers is going for $4 million an acre in Data Center Alley. And unfortunately, while Loudoun County did a lot of good things with regards to data centers, which I'll talk about later, with regards to the amount of revenue that they're generating from it, they made some pretty bad land use decisions in that they allowed residential, school development, and other development right up against data centers. So you've got these houses here. You see, this is a real picture. where you've got houses. A lot of people refer to this as mullet housing in Northern Virginia because it's all business up front, it's brick up front and all party in the back. And so if you had to live next to this, you'd be upset as well. And that's why when you see people complain about data centers, they think this is what it's like. That is what old data centers are like. The data center companies and other smart communities, and hopefully lessons if this community decides to embrace data centers, will learn the lessons of Loudoun County and other places which have not done it well, have learned how to separate these uses and incorporate them better into the community. So you wonder what a data center looks like on the inside. It's not very exciting. This is what it is. A data center is a big box like a warehouse with row after row after row of servers and switches, all connected by wires, that stores data and processes information. That's all it is. This is what that building looks like on the inside. This is a data center. This is what's inside the magic black box. It's just rows and rows and rows of servers and cables and equipment. So let's walk through the different types of data centers because you need to understand the nomenclature of data centers. And there are really three different types of data centers. The first are the cloud and the storage data centers. So when you think about the pictures of your kids and grandkids, or you think about if you're listening to Spotify, or you're listening to whatever, Ancestry.com, whatever research you're doing, these data centers have those servers that I showed on the earlier page, and they're storing the music. They're storing the Netflix movies. They're storing your family photos. They're storing information. So they are essentially essentially your computer reaches out to them, pulls down the photos, pulls down the music, pulls down the movies so that you can access it. They are just big warehouses for data. Data sits there and is used and processed. So time to access the information is important, but it's not essential. So they can be a little bit more spread out. You can have few of these large cloud storage centers around the country and deal with a lot of the issues. The next type of data centers that you see are transactional data centers. And by transactional, I remember growing up, we would go to Kmart and we would use a credit card. They'd have to pull out the book and look through the book to see whether your credit card was valid or not. Now, of course, when you just swipe or tap, what happens is that reaches out to a computer that's held by by Visa or MasterCard or American Express, whichever you use, and the transaction is cleared through the data center. So your banks, your financial institutions, your travel agencies and all use these data centers that are, again, there to process these transactions. They're usually a little bit smaller, but they also require very fast fiber connections and redundant because the response time and what's going on is very, very important. So you see these types of data centers that are around the country, but again, they're transactional data centers. And then you have the AI data centers. So when you go to ChatGPT and ask it to give you a good recipe, or ask it to set up a travel itinerary for you, or ask it to help you write a letter to somebody, you have an AI data center, which is there that essentially is a large learning model. So it's aggregating a bunch of pieces of information from all around the world and helping to solve that problem. And so you have those types of data centers. So then let's talk about the next nomenclature, and that is the types of developers of data centers. So again, you've got some nomenclature here. The first type are the hyperscalers. And they're the 6 principal hyperscalers, names that we're all familiar with. So when you hear people talk about the hyperscalers, they're talking about Microsoft, they're talking about Meta, they're talking about Google, they're talking about Amazon Web Services, they're talking about Oracle, or they're talking about OpenAI. They're the big companies that are out there, whether they're AI facilities, they're cloud storage facilities, those would be hyperscalers. So that is the company that they own the building, they own the servers in the building, and they're the one that you interface with. So you go to Google, you go to Meta, you go to Oracle, and they're handling the transaction, handling the information on your behalf. The next term that you will hear about when you talk about data centers is the co-location companies or the real estate investment trusts. So these are companies, and you see some of the names up here: QTS, Digital Realty, Stack, Switch, Equinix, CloudHQ, CyrusOne, DC Blocks. Sometimes they will be the one that develops a data center on behalf of one of the hyperscalers, or they will be one that essentially that has these servers and racks, and they essentially contract out. So I would imagine that Newberry County, but if not Newberry County, certainly the state of South Carolina, they don't run their own data center. They rent space in one of these data centers and they store data for the state or for the county. So there are racks in there that are dedicated to providing, again, cloud services and support for the IT functions of various companies. Our firm uses a cloud storage facility, one of these co-location companies that essentially just, again, rent out space. And so they have multiple tenants within a building and are not essentially just running for one particular company. Next, you're going to run into the land developers. Two of the more well-known ones are one called Tract, they're out of Boulder, Colorado, another company called Cloverleaf. So they will come into a community and buy land ahead of time and just bank it. And then as one of the co-location companies or one of the hyperscalers needs it, they've already gotten through the permitting process, they've developed utilities to the site, and essentially developing a turnkey asset for use by one of the other types of companies. So again, hyperscalers, co-location companies, and then the land developers. Again, want you to understand the nomenclature of data centers here. So let's talk about what some of the essential elements for data center operations are. The first and foremost that many of you are going to be thinking about is power. And it's not only the issue of the amount of power that data centers require, but also the type of power that they require. So why do data centers require a lot of power? Think about your computer at home, or think about your cell phone, your smartphone. What happens to it? It gets hot. Because the electricity running the system and the running the chip creates a lot of heat. So you're using electricity to run the chips, run the servers and everything, and then it creates a great deal of heat. The way your laptop or your computer at home dissipates that, there's a little fan on the back that dissipates that heat. Well, in a big data center, what you need is a great deal of air conditioning to dissipate that heat. So the power is to not only run the chips themselves, but also then to dissipate the heat. So that's why data centers, again, and with a lot of chips, consume a great deal of power. And it's, again, to run the chips themselves, to do the processing and the storing of the data that you are looking for, but also to cool the equipment down, because if the equipment gets too hot, it's not good. They also, then you have the type of power that data centers require. Obviously, they can just plug into the grid and just buy whatever is off of it, but a lot of the hyperscalers, those companies that I talked about earlier, have renewable energy requirements that they insist upon. So that they require or want to see solar power, wind power, and other renewable sources for it. So that's part of the discussion you'll hear with regards to power. Next, you're going to see water and wastewater being one of the issues. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail there in one of the later slides. But the way that you cool down a data center is you have a lot of air conditioning or you use a water cooled system. So essentially, data centers are pulling water from either from the ground or usually from the municipal system. They run it through a heat exchanger or a cooling system in the data center, and then dump that water out after it's in order. So the water runs through the cooling system and absorbs the heat coming off of the servers, and then you dispose of that heat. You evaporate it off, or you dispose of the water. And so again, that is one of the ways that you cool down the data center. So that's why data centers require a lot of water. Now, again, I'm going to get into a contrast there in a little bit. Next, fiber is very important, because again, what connects your house to that data center so you can get those pictures, you can get that music, you can get that movie, is the cable connection. And a lot of those cable connections run up and down the interstate system. They run up and down railroad lines, and run up and down utility lines, gas lines, and other things. But you need to have that fiber network to serve a data center. And finally, you're going to hear a lot about generators at data centers, because data centers need to be running 24/7, 365. Particularly think about financial transactions or other things that are going on online. So those data centers, if the power goes down and that line to serve the data center goes down, they need to have generators that kick in immediately. And data centers are not unique to, generators are not unique to data centers. When I drove in today, I looked at the Samsung plant. There are generators outside of that. There's a generator outside the county complex here. There's a generator outside of most every hotel or other commercial business. They're just there to provide backup power. But obviously, the data center requiring a great deal of power requires a great deal of generators. And the issue that comes with generators, which I'll talk about later, is noise and air issues. And that's something we need to understand. And again, all of these four elements that impact data center operations, they're all impacted by the type of the data center and the user profile. So the amount of water, the amount of power, the type of generators, and all varies based on whether it's a hyperscaler, a co-location company, a land developer, or how it's developed. So that's why when Jimmy kicked this off, he said, we're not talking about a specific user here, and we're not going to be able to address a lot of operational issues for what a data center company would use if it was to locate in Newberry County. We can't tell you how much power they're going to require, how much water, because that's going to vary based on whether a particular operator comes here or not. And those are some of the standards you as a community may want to think about. You may want to say, we only want data center operators with this sort of profile. And I'll walk through that later, because those are variables that you, through zoning, through other rules, you can influence that process. But again, we would not be able to get into a lot of the specific issues regarding any particular data center, again, because that varies based on the type of company that would come in here. It was approved by the local government. So let's look at a little bit at the U.S. of where data center clusters exist and the drivers of this. This is the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a U.S. government agency. It shows where the clusters of data centers are and the fiber networks and the power network of this country. And you can see why South Carolina is somewhat attractive, because you're on the nexus of where there's a lot of fiber and a lot of power. And so companies are very much attracted to that, because those are the two of the elements that are very essential to having data centers worth it. So then from this is where I'm going to start turning it over to Cole to go into a deep dive with regards to power issues. And there's a lot of misinformation out there regarding, or questions about the impact of electricity costs in data centers. And the one thing that I want to leave you with is that correlation does not equal causation. We are all seeing our power rates go up in this country. And it is not driven just by data centers. It is often driven by that we haven't invested in our electrical infrastructure in this country for decades. We've been letting it fall apart, much like a lot of the infrastructure in this country. Our water systems are falling apart. Our highways are falling apart. We've just underinvested in them. We're also in a period of inflation that we haven't seen since the Jimmy Carter era, folks. Copper is up 40%, steel is up 60%, labor costs are increasing. And so we're now having to play catch up with a lot of our infrastructure costs, and that is being reflected in power rates, just as it's being reflected in the cost of food, in the cost of gas, the cost of everything we buy. We're seeing that inflation come in, and that is causing power rates to go up. It is not solely driven by data centers. And when you actually look at the information, this came from the Washington Post a couple of months ago, and it looked at where power rates are increasing across the country. You actually see that the highest increases in power rates are states where you don't see a lot of data centers. You don't see a lot of data centers in Maine, folks. They don't need a lot of data centers to catch lobsters and make LLB boots in Maine. But they've got the highest increases in power rates in the country because of certain regulatory decisions they've made. New York, very high power rates. California, because of essentially environmental mandates and the wildfires that they've had, have been driving up power rates. Whereas you look at states like South Carolina, Virginia, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, are seeing increases in power rates relative to inflation than a lot of other places are. And Cole will go a little bit deeper on this in just a minute here. In fact, the reverse is the case, and that this is a little bit of a busy chart, and I apologize for it, but it looks at the demand, the acceleration of demand for electricity in this country, and it is accelerating. We've had 30 years of essentially flat electricity growth in this country, even though the population has almost increased by 50% in the country over the last 30 years. And if you look at states where you have a lot of electricity demand, like North Dakota, you're not actually seeing a lot of increase in power rates. There's not a direct relationship between the growth in power demand, some of which is driven by data centers, and the rate itself. But again, Cole will talk about that. And finally, this is a national figure, and Cole will be able to talk about it a little bit more granular for here in South Carolina, of some of those factors that are driving up some of the costs of electricity, because electricity costs are going up. But it is not solely attributable to data centers. And you see that what's going on is where the costs are going up is on the distribution side, meaning the wires to carry power to your home, and the distribution and the transmission system is where a lot of the growth is going on. So with that, I'm going to let Cole really do a deep dive on the electricity issue and the utility issue, because there were a lot of questions that are posed about that, so he can be very responsive to what y'all asked.
Yeah. Good evening. A lot of people don't know who Central is. So Central was formed by the electric co-ops to be the generation and transmission provider. So we get the economies of scale. So it's our responsibility to get the power and the transmission. We also do other services like economic development. And so that's our role in all of this. And I will start by saying we have an obligation to serve. We're not pro or against. If somebody builds a house, we have to serve it. Newberry or whatever co-op has to serve it, and that's just our job. But we recognize the risks that data centers put on the system. So our board has adopted policies and rate schedules to do our best to protect, as they say at the State House, Fred and Ethel, or the little old lady at the end of the line, from costs driven by a single industry. Chris did a really good job, and I'll talk to the generation here in a second. Just kind of laying the framework. We do not want a single consumer to drive up costs. Everybody's costs have gone up. We've all seen it, the grocery store, the gas station. But we've had a data center on the co-op system for 20 years, and it's not driving that cost up. We have some in the works, and I'll tell you that they're paying their freight. I'll talk about that in a second. But our board has told us, just like you heard at the State House, we cannot put these costs, this risk on the back of the rural communities, the underserved communities that the co-op serve. I mean, we were instituted to get power to the places that people didn't want to serve. And that's our job as a not-for-profit, is to do that. So the one issue I took with this chart is the generation cost. It is, we are seeing a tremendous increase in generation costs that isn't reflected in the national standard. And it's not limited to South Carolina. It is a regional, probably a national. I think the data is just lagging. So all the costs, just like we see in everything else, are increasing. So that's one. Trying to think here. So what we've done as the co-op system is try to put protections in place. There's a lot of questions that have come, but we make them pay for everything. You know, we talked about, we don't have a specific data center for this. We do a study. There's a cost to do that study. They have to pay the cost of the study about interconnecting. And then that leads to, okay, if we have to have upgrades to the system, you pay for that and you pay for it up front. We don't want to borrow money to have a large consumer put that risk, because if they leave, you know, we don't want to have that cost covered or uncovered, so to speak. And we do the same thing as we get this tightness around generation. We want to make sure that if we're committing to generation resources, that they are going to be here to stay and pay for it. And it's a lot. It is a lot of money. Billions of dollars in some cases, where they have to put up the financial security to ensure that all of us, and I just live down the road in Chapin, are protected from that risk. So that's our commitment to the community and to the cooperatives that we serve. There'll be more.
Pick it back up. So I said I'd talk about generators. This is a generator outside of a data center facility. They're there, like I said, they get kicked in when the power goes down. And also data center operators have to test them every once in a while. They fire them up to make sure that they're working. And data center and generators, as any of you who have your own generator at home, or you've been next to one when it starts up, you know they can be loud. And obviously they're using natural gas or diesel to run, so they obviously create emissions. And that is a concern that many people have with regards to data centers, is the noise that these generators create and the emissions that they generate. Obviously, they are regulated by the state. They'd be regulated here by the state, and they set limits on what they can emit. You can also set limits on the decibels of what a data center generator will use. Most people set that limit around 60 decibels at the property line. 60 decibels is about like this at the property line. It's a whistle. But in order to control that even more, what you're seeing a number of the data center companies do is they're putting these hush boxes around that. That again is a standard that if this community felt it was important, that you should consider. again, this is what I'm trying, one of the points that I want to talk about tonight, is there are issues that come with data centers. And how do you mitigate them if this community decides to want to do it?
We don't
So
want
you see communities do these hush boxes or other things. They may have the data center decibels be lower. They may have other requirements with regards to its emissions. And there are, again, opportunities for addressing that. Next, a lot of people are concerned with regards to the emissions and their impacts. This is a study that just came out from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, looking at one of the few data centers in Virginia where you have a data center with its on-site source of power generation. In Virginia, that's very hard to do. Our state regulatory body does not allow them very much. And you see that the Department of Environmental Quality in their study did talk about the air quality standards maintained by this combined facility, which is again the data center, meaning emissions coming from the generator itself, as well as from the power generation. That said that they believe that the increases in the concentrations that were pointed out by the Piedmont Environmental Council, which made a number of allegations that they felt were untrue, or they were certainly within the permit limits set on the data centers, and then the concerns with regards to the health impacts, that they found no evidence of that the facility was changing health impacts in the county. In fact, they found just the opposite. That is, Loudoun County is one of the most healthy communities in the country.
that's a lie.
You next look at water consumption of various uses in this country. And just to put it in perspective, agriculture each year, each day uses 118 billion gallons of water. Beef production uses 21.2 trillion gallons of water every year in this country. I love a hamburger, I love a steak, that's a lot of water. Golf courses use 547 billion gallons of water each year. Data centers collectively use 17 billion gallons of water a year, and soft drink production uses nearly 12 billion gallons a year. A lot of water, absolutely, but I did want to just put it into perspective. You next look at the way that water is used, and I talked about the open loop and the closed loop system. And this is a graphic, and I'm sorry for the little bit of a graininess here, but it shows the way that water is used in a system. So if you have that open loop system, again, the data center is pulling in water either from wells or hopefully from the municipal system. They then
Our groundwater.
they pull it in from the municipal system or from groundwater, depending on the permit. It's used to cool the facility, and then it's evaporated off. A closed loop system uses it, and the water just continuously goes through the system and closes. You see the closed loop system here. But what happens is when you have the water waste is not discharged, you have to have a lot higher electricity because of the amount of air conditioning that is necessary to keep that system going. Then a lot of people ask about what data centers and what job creation are. The typical data center has about 50 to 100 full-time jobs in a data center per 250,000 square feet. A large hyperscaler facility may have a lower number of jobs per square feet than that because they achieve certain economies of scale. Data centers do create a number of construction jobs. The average annual wages are $75,000 to $90,000 per year. And then there are induced and indirect benefits that come as a result of that. You look at the types of jobs that are in data centers, it's not just security positions. There are data center technical servers. There are people that maintain those racks and servers. They go down, they do break. There are obviously people that have to maintain the HVAC system. And there are also security and other engineering positions. But these are the types of jobs you see in a data center. You also see, this was the Brookings Institutions came out with this study a couple of weeks ago that talked about the other spin-off jobs that if you have a data center in your community, what the other types of jobs, whether it's in IT, construction, or other professional services that come from that. So how data center revenue is being used in my home state of Virginia, because it is the greatest concentration of data centers in this country. Loudoun County, which is where I talked about earlier, they last year got $900 million, $895 million. That has lowered the property tax rate and has fueled significant school construction in that county, all with cash. In Henrico County, which is the county that I live in, they decided to isolate data centers in an area near the airport in Richmond. They use that money. My tax rate has been cut by 10% in the last 2 years. And then they dedicated $60 million in a commitment to an affordable housing fund. For workforce housing in the community.
Kids that get cancer.
Mecklenburg County, which is on the Virginia-North Carolina line, is one of the largest counties in Virginia, and very similar to my home county, Louisa County, which I'll talk about, was a county that was wiped out by NAFTA. Tobacco, textiles, and furniture were the main industries in that county, and they were wiped out in the 1990s. It was one of the poorest counties in Virginia. Mecklenburg County, Microsoft came into that county and developed a series of data centers that takes up 4/100ths of 1% of the county's land mass. And you see Mecklenburg County now has the lowest property tax rate in the state at 38 cents per 100. They replaced their entire school system in 5 years. 1 new high school, 3 new middle schools, 2 new middle schools and 3 new elementary schools, all paid for by cash in the county, just off of what was paid for by Mecklenburg County. Prince William County, which is also in Northern Virginia, they generate $280 million a year in personal and real property taxes coming from data centers. Louisa County, which is my home county, when I was growing up there, we had 1 stoplight in the entire county, and we now have 6. They've just announced a 15% reduction in the car tax rate, and that's even before the data centers have been completed there. The actual data center, the Louisa County, its claim to fame, that's where the North Anna nuclear power plant was built, which is one of Dominion's Vepco's plants in Virginia, and that's their first tax payment is what built my high school. What are some of those? And I'm going to close with not only some of the benefits, but also some of the issues that you need to consider if this community wants to think about data centers. Again, some of the benefits: low community impacts compared to other alternative uses. Data centers, because they don't have as many jobs as a manufacturing facility and don't have as many as a distribution facility, they don't create a lot of traffic. They create very little strain on the school system because, again, they don't create the significant number of jobs the way a larger manufacturing facility would, and they create little demand for additional housing. They occupy very little land relative to the economic value or the fiscal value that they create for community. They do allow for the spreading of some of the fixed costs of infrastructure, whether it's water or wastewater or utilities. They do have high-paying jobs. They do create a significant amount of local property tax revenue, most of which is used for school construction and school operations in counties that have welcomed them. And they also do attract data center supply chain companies. So don't think that just because data centers are the only industry here. Again, you in South Carolina are between the 2 largest concentrations of data centers in the world, Atlanta and Virginia. And so you got to think about all the companies that build the servers, and build the racks, and build the cables that supply those data centers. So that could also be an economic development target for this community. But what are the issues? And I'm going to close with this. What are the issues to consider and trade-offs with regards to data centers? And I hope you will pay attention to these because they are the issues that should drive the community conversation regarding data centers. First and foremost, would you prefer to use the industrial land for warehouses, manufacturer housing, or for data centers? That is the discussion that needs to be held. What are the trade-offs with regards to traffic, with regards to pollution, with regards to job creation? And what would you rather see this land be used for? That is a valid discussion to have with the community. You need to have a redevelopment plan. These companies are spending billions of dollars and they intend to operate these facilities for decades. But what happens if they close? Just like what happens if a mall closes, or a warehouse, or a factory. You should always have plan B in your pocket or think about what alternative uses are for these if they were to close. I don't think they're going to, given the demands that are out there, but you should always be thinking about any economic development project. What is the alternative use for these? And remember, I noted in the beginning, these are just large warehouses for data servers. So think about, well, what could be next and how you incorporate that into your planning and zoning as you approach these. You need to have community consensus on how to spend the revenue. These do generate a great deal of revenue. So this community decides, should they be dedicated to parks or to schools or to public safety, or what are the priorities of this community? Have that discussion now before you decide whether you're going to include those. Welcome these in the community. To decide, they do generate tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. So what would that do for this community? Whether we're going to put it solely to lowering property tax rates, or we're going to invest it in infrastructure, or do a little bit of both. What's the decision? Do you want to do one and done versus multiple data centers? My home county, Louisa County, where I grew up, has decided they're just going to allow for the 3 complexes by Amazon Web Services, and that's it. You do not need to be Loudoun County. So think about it. Do we want to just have one, take the revenue from that? Do we want to have none? Do we want to have multiples? That is a valid community conversation to have. How do we want to align this with local workforce training programs? What you see a lot of the data center companies do is they go into the community college system, they go into the career technical education system, and they work with that system to develop a pipeline of workers that can be that can get the jobs from the data centers. Now is the time to start thinking about how you use your community college system, your career technical education system to create that pipeline of workers. Next, a word of caution is to make sure that the revenues that you do get in, that you put them towards one-time uses, because the revenue can vary year by year based on assessed values and other things. So what you've seen the mistakes made by some communities is they just throw the money into their operating budget, they lower the tax rate immediately, and then the assessment drops. And so you may want to think about, again, this from a budgeting perspective, what is important to this community and how do we allocate the money that could come from data centers if they were to come in the community. You want to have proactive planning and zoning ordinance to address issues like buffers, noise, setbacks. How do you deal with the noise? What kind of lighting, what proximity to uses, other uses do we want or don't want in this community? That is a valid community discussion to have. And what you see the smart communities around the country doing is they're setting up an overlay district, or they're saying we will only allow data centers to be here and not here. We will not allow them close to this use or that use. We are going to set noise limits at this use. We're going to work with DNR, the environmental regulatory agency, to say we're only going to allow emissions during these times, or only allow lighting to this standard, or only allow generators to be run during these periods. Those are the sorts of decisions this community needs to grapple with, and now is the time to do it. You also need to be thinking about what the ability of this community is to permit these facilities. Your electrical team, your construction team, do they have the ability, or do they need to see outside experts to help with inspecting these facilities when they come online? And finally, think about what you're going to do with regards to housing and construction workers that might come in for this. Again, these are the decisions smart communities go through. You set the standards and decide, do we want them or do we not want them? Data center companies would rather know upfront what the rules of the game are. And if the rules of the game are, this is a community that has made the decision not to welcome them, then that is it. They will go to another community. They may go to a neighboring community and create a tax windfall for that community, but that is the decision for this community. Alternatively, you can come up with the standards that are going to govern and regulate this process so that you have benefits, you have decided what you want and what you don't want. That is a valid community discussion. And with that, Jimmy, I think you're going to run through some of the questions that were asked. I think we tried to touch on them, just comments.
We are, and there were more than 50 individuals who submitted questions online, and we have, some of those were similar, and we also have some questions that were submitted in writing downstairs, so we'll get to those as well. And I'll just throw the questions out, and either one of you can answer, depending on who it applies to. First question is, how long does an electric study generally take, and who generally absorbs the cost if upgrades must be made to the electric grid, the developer or the electric provider?
Yeah, I'll take that. There's two different studies that we do, a preliminary planning and scoping study that takes anywhere from 60 to 90 days. If it takes longer, they pay for it. The minimum deposit is $75,000 plus $500 a megawatt. So it's a big investment to do that study. At the end of that study, they have 30 days if they want to proceed because it's preliminary. And then they go into a front-end engineering design study, which is just a more detailed study at the end of that. And again, they pay for it up front. It's based on the estimated cost of the study. At the end of that, they have 30 days to enter into a construction agreement to build whatever facilities may be required. And they are agreeing to pay for those costs. And they're agreeing to pay for them up front. So we don't want to put any burden on the co-op system. And again, I don't know if I explained it very well before, but the 19 co-ops, and Newberry obviously being one of those, they own us. So they tell us what to do to protect your communities. But we don't want any risk on you guys, ratepayer. If there's a generation need that's identified as a part of that study, they have to put financial assurances in place for that as well. And again, as I said earlier, that's very significant and can be a limiting factor in their decision making.
Okay. Based on your knowledge, I think, Chris, this would probably be for you. Based on your knowledge of data centers, have, if any, negative impacts occurred to wells, creeks, aquifers, or any downstream users and what preventative measures can be put into place to mitigate environmental pollutants related to the data center?
Sure, there are, as with any large water user, there are certainly instances in this country of where data centers have impacted the groundwater availability or surface water availability. I cannot deny that. That's absolutely the case. A lot of times that is because they've tapped into groundwater instead of tapping into municipal systems. So what you're seeing is many states are moving towards either at local level or at the state level. You're seeing states, Michigan did it just last year. They said that we are not going to allow for any groundwater or surface water withdrawal for data centers. Absolutely not. What we're going to say is that they can only tap into municipal systems. And after they've gone through similar to the studies that they go through that Cole talked about on the electric side, they've gone through a water study as well to see whether the municipal system can support it.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there are certainly instances, but usually people are mitigating it through the ties to the municipal system.
All right, next question. What types of environmental studies are typically completed in the development of a site for an industry or a data center? And what types of public oversight and permitting processes are typically desired or required for data center development? You kind of touched on that a little earlier.
Yeah, if there's any transmission upgrades, we would have to do our standard environmental studies, historical studies, anything that we would normally do as a course of business. But I think the rest of the zoning and studies would be left to counties.
Sure, you're exactly right, Cole. So, a data center is a building just like any other building. So you're going to have the normal permits, erosion, sediment control. If there are wetlands impacts, you got to look at endangered species impacts just as if it was, again, any other thing. The only other extra permit that typically a data center requires is the air permit because of the generators. And that obviously is done at the state level.
What about the life expectancy of a data center?
Sure, I tried to touch on that a little bit. Again, most of these companies are making their decisions. They're planning to be there for a very long time. You don't spend several $billions and walk away from it in 5 years. But my advice there was that you have built into your plan some sort of way to look at how do you redevelop the asset if it's no longer be a data center, just as you would anything else that develops in the community.
All right, back to an electrical question, Cole. Typically, what infrastructure upgrades and costs are required to meet the electrical needs? Who is typically held responsible for covering that, facility or the community?
The facility. I mean, any major, and it's site dependent. I mean, a good site, it's $60 million. A less good site, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and they pay it. They have deep pockets, and they're not going to ask you all to pay for it.
All right, I'm going to switch from the sheet that I had from the submitted questions earlier to one that was submitted downstairs. Whose data will be stored? Is it private, government, or build it and they will come?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the ultimate user. So whether it could be your photos on Apple, it could be Netflix, it could be banking data, it could be a government user. It's going to depend on the user.
Or a lot of the things you already mentioned.
Yes, sir.
All right. Is it likely or unlikely, based upon comparable data center placements in similar communities, that property taxes and electric bills for the existing residents or businesses will increase?
We're doing everything in our power to make sure that data centers do not increases.
On the property tax front, I think the property tax front, the universal answer is if that is the decision of the community to take the revenue to generate from data centers, they use these to reduce property tax.
And there are other avenues you could go. You mentioned that earlier.
Yes, sir.
Do data centers, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So just because I heard it, right? I got to be real careful.
How about that eminent domain in Georgia power?
I can't speak on that.
Oh, well, next year, buying dominion.
So we want to adjust what we charge them to make sure that we cover all the risks. I mean, we're going to charge them more than your average consumer. We recognize the communities that we serve, and we want to protect you. And so that's what we're doing. That's what the co-ops are doing.
All right, next question. Do data centers have any effect on cellular and Wi-Fi service for surrounding areas?
I'm not aware of any scientific evidence to that fact or that presumption.
Okay. How do data centers affect nearby communities in terms of noise, lighting, air quality, and overall quality of life. Some of that was touched on earlier.
Yes, sir. There are impacts. I'm not going to deny it. Absolutely. There is noise, there are emissions, there's lighting, there's security, and that is something, water, absolute power consumption, everything to support it. What I do say is that is up to obviously state regulators and then the community to decide what is acceptable and what's not.
Okay. What cybersecurity, physical security, and operational reliability measures are typically used in small to medium data centers?
Sure. I'll talk about, obviously, cybersecurity is very important. Nobody wants their information compromised. We all get upset when it happens. So you would hope that they have the highest possible cybersecurity standards that exist. And if I'm sure the utility folks in this county can talk about, I'm sure the Newberry Public Utilities Agency gets hit dozens of times a day with cyber attacks. Most of them originating out of China, Russia, or Eastern Europe. So you want to make sure that these facilities are as secure as possible from a cyber perspective. There is physical security in most of these facilities, whether it's fencing or obviously on-site security that occurs, and obviously operational reliability. They have to be going 24/7. And that's why generators are important, and you have staff there 24/7 on 3 shifts to make sure that everything is working, because if something breaks, people get very upset.
Okay, next is a question from downstairs earlier, 2 parts. Who stands to gain long-term in the event of data center being built in Newberry? And why was the study being pushed so quickly when at least one council member stated in open session that he still needed to learn more about the impacts? The second part, I guess you got to ask the council.
Absolutely, Jimmy. That would be an answer for, or question for elected officials. Who stands to benefit? I think there's both sides of it. Obviously, if you allow them to come in, there's the revenue that's generated from those data center facilities that, again, the community has to have the conversation about how to spend it. And I'll be candid, these companies, it is a business. It is a business. So obviously they're not building data centers as a public charity. They're building it because of the statistics that I talked about earlier. It's because consumers are demanding it.
Okay. Typically, what operational efficiency standards are applied to data centers, water use, and cooling technologies? How will a data center affect our water supply, even if it's closed loop system? I think you touched on that.
Yeah, I touched on it, but I'll talk about the more of the efficiency standards. Again, that's going to vary based on not only the user itself, but also vary based on state law or local requirements. Again, I'll go back to that Michigan experience that I talked about earlier. Not only on the water side are they mandating that companies can only tap into the municipal system, but they are mandating that these data centers going forward within 3 years, they're going through a new certification process. They have to meet certain either LEED certification standards, green clothes, US BREEAM standards, and other things with regards to the efficiency of those facilities, or they don't get to operate within the state. You're seeing that start to be mandated. Virginia's having that discussion right now with regards to how they link those operating standards to our sales and use tax exemption. So again, it's a matter of state law and local preference. And again, that is part of the community conversation that you should be having now.
All right, another question from downstairs earlier. Since the county does not yet know if the infrastructure can support the project, why are we voting to give a developer legal control of public land through an option before the feasibility studies are completed and made public? I think that's a question for.
And the only thing I'll go back to is this is part of the community conversation that should be held.
All right. In your experience, are data centers generally offered incentive packages? If so, what do these typically look like?
No, the co-op's not for profit. There is no incentives on the power side for data centers.
Aside from the power side, there are 2 principal sources of incentives for data centers. The first and foremost is South Carolina, like 40 other states, has a sales and use tax exemption on data center equipment. Just as there's a sales use tax exemption on manufacturing equipment because you don't tax the inputs to a product, you tax the output. So the South Carolina data center sales and use tax exemption says that a data center company, again, under current law in South Carolina, that if a data center creates at least 25 jobs within 5 years of opening, and those jobs have to pay at least 150% of the state or county per capita wage in order to qualify. The company has to invest at least $50 million over 5 years that they do get the sales and use tax exemption. That exemption is set to expire on January 1, 2032. What you will see some data center companies ask for is what I'm sure y'all are familiar with, a FELO, a fee in lieu of taxation structure. That is not, the sales use tax exemption is you meet those standards, you get it. A fee in lieu is decided locally, and it is negotiated. And so it is up to the community to decide whether you get it or not. The only other incentive that you typically see associated with data center companies is often they will work in partnership to develop that workforce pipeline that I talked about earlier.
Right, and this is not a question you can answer, but I'm gonna throw it out there because it deals with the fee in lieu. Are there any discussions about giving fee in lieu of taxes, property tax abatements, infrastructure assistance, or special revenue credits if the project advances? I don't think you can answer that question. That's a question for local government. Here's another question. What transparency and public reporting practices are commonly used for large data center projects and operations?
I would say the normal ones for all other industrial consumers. We don't have any special requirements for data centers that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean, a data center operator, when it comes to a community like any other economic development project, is typically going to ask for a non-disclosure agreement. Just as they will when they're working with the utility company, they're going to ask for some non-disclosure agreement during an initial period. That doesn't have to be granted, but it is typical in economic development. Obviously, that non-disclosure agreement does expire after some time. Once the project obviously gets further along. If the project is allowed to go forward, there are obviously various permits that are required that I talked about earlier, erosion, the endangered species, all of those have public processes associated with them. Obviously, the air permit is something that obviously is very tightly reported on and monitored and has to be permitted by the state with the public notice and hearing requirements that go along with that.
Okay, another question from downstairs. What is the size of the facility? We don't really know that yet, I guess. How long will the facility be used? What is the power requirement? Water usage, noise pollution? What happens if the company bankrupts? Who cleans it up? Are there tax breaks? I think we've answered that as best we can at this moment. All right. And the final question I have, what other towns or counties were offered this and why did they turn it down? Newberry, I know, was not the first choice, end of quote.
Without a specific project, I don't know that we can answer it. I know that other communities have, are moving forward with data centers, yeah.
Well, folks, those are all the questions that were submitted. Some of those, well, you had an opportunity to submit the questions, and that's all. I can only read what I have here, and that's all I have. So the questions were submitted. We had 12 questions submitted online. There were more submitted, but a lot of those were repetitive. So
you keep talking about community conversations. Where is our local government to talk to them?
I'm not in charge of your local government. And this is an information session, and it is now over.